Hi guys, my name is Tamseel Hussain and I'm the founder of LetMeBreathe.in. It's Environment Day and this year's theme is biodiversity. In just about a few seconds, we're going to find out why it's important to save India's biodiversity and how can we do it. We brought together an amazing panel thanks to our partners Twitter India and United Nations India. And this year is really special for Let Me Breathe because this is a third Environment Day. Yeah, just only a third Environment Day. And the world has been celebrating it for years. Without further delay, I'm going to introduce our panelists for today. The first panelist is Renata Dessallien. She's the resident coordinator for United Nations. She has over 30 years of experience in United Nations in Asia and Africa. She holds a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University. She also has a master's of arts degree from University of Columbia, and she has a bachelor's of music from University of Ottawa. We're very excited to have Renata on board because we'll understand how collectively we can all work together to save our biodiversity. The second panelist we have is Prerna Bindra, who's a celebrated author, who's a conservationist, who's an environmentalist, and she really inspires me personally because I remember when we were starting Let Me Breathe, we were very inspired by her book, which was on vanishing species of wildlife, and we're very excited to have her on board. She also formerly served on the Indian National Wildlife Board, and she's very vocal on Twitter on a lot of issues on environment when it comes to how collectively action can be taken. The third panelist we have is actor Randeep Hooda, whose recent movie Extraction has been booming on Netflix. He's a very vocal environmentalist. He's also the ambassador. He's the ambassador for United Nations Environment Program for Aquatic Migratory Species. He also believes that awareness is critical, but at the same time, awareness without action is pointless because more people need to act. I'm very excited to talk to him. Just a few seconds, stay tuned. We're going to launch the panel. Happy World Environment Day, everybody. And please keep putting your questions in the comments. One of the biggest reasons why we're actually doing this panel on Environment Day is because this year's theme is biodiversity. And when we look at it, that biodiversity, and at the time that humanity is going through, especially in India, we see like COVID, we see lockdown, we see so many issues happening. But one of the biggest reasons is Environment Day is falling at a time where we need to take care of our planet. We need to understand how biodiversity can be protected. So leading that, I want to ask the first question to Renata. Renata, this year's World Environment Day is really, really massive. And what is the significance? How is it different for UN this time?
Well, I think lots of differences. None of us have ever experienced COVID-19 before, and it's turned our world completely upside down. I think that in many respects, it's reminded us that basically the biosphere in which we're living and us, human beings, are absolutely one. I mean, we're one entity. We are part of the biosphere. This virus hopped over from the animal kingdom into the human sphere because we mistreated the environment, because we have taken wild animals out of their natural habitat. We've stacked them in tiny cages in unhygienic conditions. And as a result of those favorable conditions, the virus has hopped from the animal kingdom to humans now, and with all the incredible devastation that it has wreaked around the world, health-wise and socioeconomic-wise. So, I mean, I think the reason it's so important this year is not only because we can see what happens in concrete terms when we mistreat the environment, when we lack respect for this natural order of things that exists in the biosphere, but also because I think, quite frankly, cumulatively these last few decades, we've pursued a form of growth or a form of development that is totally divorced from, quite frankly, the real reality. Biodiversity is life itself, and we are all interconnected. Whether you speak to a scientist who will tell you that the carbon atom travels through all of us, through the animal kingdom, through the mineral kingdom, through oceans, through the rain, and ends up going through cycles. We are all interconnected, whether it's at that level or whether it's at the level of just breathing. You and I are breathing oxygen that is coming from plants and trees, and they're in turn absorbing our carbon dioxide. But I think this moment is it should be a turning point for us. COVID-19 should be a wake-up call for the way that we interact with the environment and the attitude that we take towards it, which up until now has been destructive. And I think it's partly because our mindset is viewing this in a totally wrong way. It's not that, it's not the environment that is a product of us. We may be at the apex of, the animal kingdom, but we are the product of the environment, and we are the product of nature. We are part of it, and we have to be, I wouldn't even say custodians of it because it's bigger than us, but we have to be good stewards. And if we don't, nature can come back with a revenge, as it has in the form of COVID-19.
Definitely. I think when we look at how we are aligned with the environment, it also becomes really, really important for us to become active citizens. But I think before I go there, Randeep, I wanted to ask a question. I've seen you take up a lot of issues on your profile where you actually select very specific community-driven campaigns and start talking about it, which is related to forests. You're doing something on saving the tiger. You're doing something on migratory birds. How would you explain, let's just say people who watch your movies, people who are your fans, people who are like young people in India who actually look up to you a lot, how would you explain biodiversity to them in simple terms?
How do I explain biodiversity? See, this whole planet is one singular organism which breathes on the same sphere, so to speak. Human beings are a part of that organism. We are not that organism. For us to have healthy lives, we have to have healthy water, air, and we have to have other beings, which if they go missing, will have a domino effect somewhere else, and something else is going to come and bite us in the ass, like the COVID. Yeah. So this whole thing is interconnected, whether it is an ant you see in your houses or outside, or a bee or a butterfly or a lizard or a crow or a tiger, which not many people go to see, but everything is interconnected. And if you take one piece out of that puzzle, which is the one single organism of the world, it will start having a domino effect in other aspects, and sooner than later, it is going to come and affect the things that we need to live, which is air, water, and land. So when we talk about biodiversity, we talk about the whole planet Earth, our Mother Earth as a whole, out of which we are a part. If we remove humans, as we have seen due to COVID, the nature flourishes. So the nature does not really need us. We need nature for us to survive. There were, some years ago, it was all taken for granted that it is an unlimited, infinite source of whatever we need, but that is not the case. Now we are realizing with so many things, with climate change and with the all kinds of, these viruses popping up, that, hey, it is a limited resource. And if we, as she said, as stewards do not look after it, we will not be able to survive ourselves, our next generation. And if we keep on going as callously as we have been, then only we will feel it in our own lifetimes.
And definitely, I think we see a rising movement of young people and Gen Z specifically, right? Like the teenagers who are rising up and taking things in their own hands, because our generation, I think the millennials and the baby boomers, they've completely, they say we've completely ruined the planet and we won't listen to you. Prerna, you've been someone who's been very connected to this for a very long time. Like, do you think like a lot of movements that are popping up, like first it started with air pollution, then it started with water, and now it's like biodiversity becoming such a massive thing. How do you think where we are when it comes to protecting India's biodiversity through a lot of these social movements coming up and a lot of these young people joining in to build it? Is there a historic pattern you see? Is there something that you see like it changing?
I don't know about historic pattern. India, protection of nature. India's culture is rooted in nature like no other country, no other, if I may say so, religion. Across all our diversity in religions, we respect and revere nature. And we've had, a treatise going back to 300 BC to protect elephants. So we've had elephant sanctuaries since then. So we talk about Yellowstone as the oldest national park, but hey, we go. So our culture, I think that is one of the key reasons, besides the very strong laws that we have, which we are unfortunately unraveling right now, that has stood India in good stead in conserving its biodiversity, its nature, its wildlife, its land. We had the Chipko movement, which was in the 1970s, which was a community-driven, women-driven movement. In the Himalayas, we had a similar one in Tamil Nadu, or was it the erstwhile Andhra Pradesh. So at the same time, we had the Silent Valley movement, which was also community-driven in Kerala to protect a virgin rainforest from a dam which would submerge it. And we had politicians who were supporting wildlife conservation, and we had Project Tiger, we got the Wildlife Protection Act, we got the Forest Conservation Act. So I think it was all of this which has helped shape India's conservation movement, which was, it's a people-driven movement. It got political support, and now we have young children. I mean, we kind of, what unfortunately haven't happened in the intervening years, post 1990s, we have lost the way, so to speak, and we are now ranked 178th. Just I think 5 from the bottom or some such in the poor environment index. We have 13 of the 20 most polluted cities in the world, and I could go on and on and on. So, but I see young children, I see this movement, I see, it gives me hope. In a very bleak scenario, when you see a lot of forests being diverted for industry, infrastructure, etc. I don't know if I've answered your question, but
yeah. I think it gives a definite historic pattern. Renata, a question goes when it comes to like the amount of movements that are coming in, and a lot of like UN has this beautiful system that every year we celebrate Environment Day. There's so many days we celebrate, and the whole year UN works on so many programs. Are there any programs that you would like to talk about when it comes to conservation? I know you have a UN ambassador here as well on migratory birds. Anything you would like to mention?
I'd like to perhaps mention that, yes, it's true, we have international days for so many things, and the environment is absolutely a core priority area for the United Nations. So we have days, we have conventions, we have protocols, we have a whole slew of different mechanisms to try to get the world community to come together and to prioritize the preservation and the care for our environment, all aspects of it. Perhaps 2 things I'd like to mention right now, because very recently India has taken the presidency of 2 of our environmental conventions, which are very, very important. One is the Convention to Combat Desertification, which is all about land use, land quality, water resources, etc., land fertility, which is hugely important for India, but hugely important for the world. And there was a committee of parties, which means basically member states coming together to try to agree to more measures to protect these very delicate desert ecosystems. And India has now taken the presidency of that globally, so that's really important. And I think, when you think of deserts in India, you don't have to think long and hard to connect that to a whole slew of environmental concerns such as water and land fertility, etc. Second is the Convention on Migratory Species, which of course is close to all of our hearts. And once again, India has taken the presidency of these. So I think these 2 are really important for next year, because they're sitting in the hands of India as the chair of these 2 conventions. They're part of a threesome. The third one is the International Convention to Combat Climate Change. But these 2 are equally important. In fact, to think of them separately would be a big mistake. So these are 2 particular ones, but I'd also like to mention that from 2021 to 2030, we're entering the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. You'll be really glad to hear that.
Wow,
so
that's amazing.
This whole decade, I think, it's really a moment for us to try to make amends for, as you were saying, Prerna, since the 1990s, our generation has really disappointed, younger people, and disappointed ourselves, quite frankly, because our own consciences are definitely pricked by this. So this next decade gives us an opportunity to, again, focus really on ecosystems. And I think it has to come with a mindset shift. Because I think the mindset of the 90s and mindset of the first decade of this century, it really has taken us too far away from the real reality, which, as Randeep was explaining, we are part of one system. We are one with it. We're not separate from it. Somehow our models have made us appear separate, and that has caused great harm. Because to think that somehow we can advance, human well-being without advancing the well-being, or at least not stepping on the toes of the bigger environment, is a completely erroneous way of working. And I think it's evident for young people. It's so evident that you don't even have to explain it to them. In fact, I think young people, when they're growing up, and ask their parents really telling questions, they get to the core of it, and I think parents then realize that they have to adjust their children to the real world, which is an awkward thing, because we've basically created a system that is out of sync with reality, and we have to correct that.
Definitely. And I think we see like the smallest of towns are now being more aware, regardless of language, regardless of anything, they're being more aware of environment, and especially the kids who are leading the way, whether it becomes about plastic, whether it becomes about taking care of animals. It's very, very interesting. It's also linked to, as Prerna mentioned, the roots of our country, right? Roots of our culture about protecting animals and environment. Randeep, as the ambassador, what really is your role when it comes to, because we see, like, I remember even when we were talking to you in India, one of the most important things is there's so many celebrities, so many influencers, when they talk about being ambassadors. We had Dia, like just about 2 months ago, who was an UNEP ambassador. What is your role when it comes to making sure that this can happen, like a collective care for environment can happen?
Dia is an empath. I am a doer. First of all, let me start by the convention. It was a very nice convention, though me being a part of little side events was very difficult because it was all about photos. But I found that it was only about converted talking to the converted. So I don't know how much effect it would have in terms of getting two people. But yes, the ideas, people coming together and discussing their ideas was very interesting. Now, all four of us, for example, are on this panel. And we are talking about it. We are all aware. We are very much into it. But we cannot do anything, I'm telling you. All we can do is talk about it, unless some of us start going to the ground level work and start. You cannot change the world at one go. So you got to take up little projects. That's what I have been trying to do, and somewhat successfully. Somewhere I've failed. But the point is that we as a collective, like for example, I was on Twitter, my friend Afroz Shah, with whom I had been a part of his beach cleaning movement for many years now. And I actually saw him first and kind of discovered him when he was just alone. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm going to take out all the plastics." "How are you going to do it?" He says, "I'm going to do it." So there was he trying to help the migrants right now. And he was sitting at the back of a truck. He'd put out a picture saying that, it's been a tough day. And behind him in the truck were plastic water bottles and juice bottles and other packings of everything, which was made of non-biodegradable stuff. Now in this pandemic, he himself, I was laughing at him. I said, he himself is going to go pick up that plastic bottle from the beach. Now we are telling the young kids, don't use single-use plastic, don't use plastic. But every Tetra pack of juice or the milk that comes to their house or even the pen that they're using in school is all plastic. So how are you going to tell these kids to not use these things? So it has to come from both ends. It has to be people doing ground level work. Of course, awareness is important, but just awareness is not going to just change. I mean, that people can just like and retweet a tweet saying, "Oh, I also feel it." And they really feel that their job is done. So that's really dangerous, in my opinion. We have to encourage people to join in and do ground level work, physical work, or financial work, or some sort of work in which they're actually involved, and that is going to carry the change forward. Just feeling happy about sharing something on social media gives people, I feel, a false sense of doing something. And we have to encourage people to come on the ground. Now, kids are a big thing in that. Similarly, when this convention happened, what I really liked about this UN's idea was that it was going to make countries responsible amongst each other to keep up these habitats of these beautiful animals and birds and aquatic animals who go across the world. So it puts a kind of an extraneous pressure that you are being watched on individual countries from other countries in the terms of these conventions, and India is heading it. India, like Prerna was talking about the most polluted cities and all that. It's because our population is very high, and we are not giving alternate ways of people to change their lifestyles to cause that effect. Our whole effort should be lifestyle changes. Only then will it happen. Like India is heavily dependent on coal. Now they need more coal because they need to produce more energy to catch up with the economy. So in that, now they're going to biodiverse areas which are coal rich, which were protected till now, but illegal mining was already going on. Right? So having a blanket thing on conservation or about the environment without keeping in the balance of development sustainably, but keeping it in mind, is what is a holistic solution, keeping all parties in mind, the people who need those roads, the people who need that energy, people who need employment, keeping that in mind, plus trying to preserve what we have got. This kind of balanced approach and causing a lifestyle change is, I feel, the future, but I might be wrong.
We totally believe in that same thing as well, like building small moments to building a movement. Renata, is there anything you would like to add to what Randeep said? Prerna, Renata, anyone who would like to say something to this?
Just that, when we talk about energy, India is energy self-sufficient. And while the problem, I mean, it's a very complex problem to discuss in 2 minutes, but I would be very, very cautious because coal is a double whammy. Global warming plus, I call it climate crisis, not climate change. Deforestation, you let go of a climate sink. So where is the balance that we speak of when we let so many of our most biodiverse forests, and we need water, as much as we need to reach energy where there isn't energy. Yes. And as Randeep very rightly points out, it's a complex problem, overpopulation. We have to think alternatives. But I'm very sorry to say that we don't have a balance. The balance is tilting against nature. And the COVID, yes, this has really, and again,
the nature was
like, very well, it's bitten us in the ass, but it's just not that. We are seeing hailstorms, we are seeing cyclones, we are seeing droughts, and we know how much pollution, the number of people succumbing to air pollution linked deaths. So, whatever, these forests are a lifeline. We depend on them for not just forests, seas. They provide us half the oxygen we breathe. And we treat them like a big, giant dustbin, trash bin, where we dump all our... So, I think it's really a time to retrospect, really a time to reimagine the way we go forward. What do we mean about development? Are we factoring in concerns regarding biodiversity, nature, conservation, social concerns? Is it equitable? I think so that is what I would think is the way forward, that we need to reimagine what we mean by development. How do we go forward with nature as a rally, not as a burden?
I feel that, for example, in my opinion, my personal opinion, I might be wrong. As I always say, I'm always trying to explore the idea rather than form an idea. Like, for example, Save the Tiger was a big campaign, and now the tiger numbers have risen. and there are habitat issues more than the tiger number issues, right? So if in that aspect, in the man-animal conflict is growing by the day because of our human population is growing. So unless India passes a population law or something, this is going to keep carrying on. Now, there was this whole thing, campaign of Save the Tiger. It was done by the educated, well-off people who had the mind space to think about the betterment of the environment and the larger good of the planet, rather than people who were involved in earning their daily bread and making ends meet, right? But that thing has also changed. So now I feel instead of saving the tiger, let us save the people who are in touch with the habitats, various habitats of the tiger, who with socio-economic benefits, with education, with sensitization, with instilling a sense of pride, they themselves will save the tiger. You and me sitting here in a 5-star hotel over Earl Grey tea, sipping and talking about saving the tiger ain't gonna do it. We got to start saving the tiger in the local languages, for example. You know, we've got to climb down that brown sahib kind of a pedestal and involve more and more people, local communities in it. And that is the only way out. Similarly with the sea, like with Afroz, what he has done, I used to always keep telling him that why are you going to keep picking up this trash? Because it's not only coming from these local communities, it's coming from the high rises. So let's block that. He says, I have to block it through education. So what he started doing in all these communities live near the sea, they have firstly started converting their plastic trash, separating it and putting it out. So he's educated those people and all that. He's gone into that. So that is actual work done, right? Now I've been trying to force him. Hopefully he will listen to me and put nets before that, so that you know, go to the source of the problem. But those high-rise people also have to be educated about how to separate things. And then, like, for example, the water companies are not selling you water, they're selling you plastic bottles, right? So we have got to come together like that and be more democratic about it. The world is basically a big conflict of interests. We have to not only resolve the conflict, but point the interests in the similar direction of betterment on all angles, from a coal miner to our UN person over here. We all have to change that mindset and provide the alternatives.
Definitely. I don't know if you've heard about the story of Mangarbani, which is a small forest right next to Gurgaon, like all the high rises. It's just beautiful forest, right? It's trees, everything is pristine, protected for hundreds of years. Why? Because the community said there's God in everything over here. Don't touch it. It still is saying as it is right now. And it's amazing.
I interviewed the Chief Minister of Haryana the other day and I did not interview him like a sycophant. I asked him absolutely questions about environment. And I asked him about, and he himself told me about this law, about the Punjab Land Act and all that.
The PLPA
Act. So why is it happening? So he explained to me, or in the interview, he said, first of all, you have to understand the environment is my priority. And the case is in the Supreme Court. I will listen to the Supreme Court, and so will you, and so will everybody else. That's decided. I said, yeah, that's decided. So he said, so nothing is really in our hands right now? I said, no. So I said, okay. He said, I will explain to you why we wanted to change it. He says, because if we actually seriously apply that Land Act, then half of Gurgaon is going to go into forest. What am I going to do with all these high-rise buildings, these MNCs, the economic hub of the country, and the farmers who've started, who've been farming there for at least last 30, 40 years. The law was made in 1900s. So I said, so, okay, so now that all these things are in account, would you stop? He said, I will not even give another inch of that land to anybody. Now that's his promise. Now there are many layers amongst layers in the hierarchy of the government. But now from that, I come to think, okay, so I was also one of the people who was talking against the amendment of that act till you listen to the other party. So we have a tendency of throwing stones before we know everything at the same time. Throwing stones at the government and the people who are actually in power and can do something, I feel is counterproductive, right? You should point it out to them. You should pursue it. But just negating them and calling them names in that way. It is just, you are just making it worse. Talk to the people, understand their problem, and then keep following it up. We cannot all go take up arms against it. No. So all we have to do is we've got to keep all parties in the same interest.
This is
Don't
why,
alienate anybody.
this is why you're a UN ambassador.
So,
I matured by falling on my face many times.
also, Randeep, you're making. Sorry, Renata. Yeah.
You used to say that the UN is all about bridge making, and what counts at the end is the results, right?
Yes.
And I completely agree that if we're talking whether it's tigers or forests or whatever, I mean, we have to unravel what the problem is and deal with all the multifarious dimensions of it. The problem up until now is that the environment's always gotten the raw end of the stick because we haven't valued it. So, I think from a policy perspective, collectively, the world has to move towards a way of measuring human progress, which is more respectful of the environment. Right now, the economists have developed a system where environment and other, I would say, public bads are considered externalities. Why? Why are they an externality? External to what? We already said we're all part of this planet. We're all interconnected. What is an externality in that context? It doesn't compute. So unless you can have a system that allows you, even if it's a parallel system, I'm not suggesting you have to throw GNP as a measure out the window, but GNP is a very, very, very crude measure. And surely we're sophisticated enough as human beings now that we can find out at least shadow measures that take into account these so-called externalities, which I contest are not externalities. Second of all, we have to think about well-being in a much more holistic way. And I don't know a better place to do that than India, because as was evoked earlier in the conversation, this country is steeped in wisdom, steeped in profound understanding of our oneness, our interconnectedness, our oneness, in various ways, right? I mean, from the most materialistic atoms to a more spiritual understanding of interconnectedness. So when I think about India today, I think often about the Indian challenges that are being faced, but I also think about India and the world. And India in the world is rising. There's no question about it. I mean, we've all taken a hit from COVID-19, but India is rising in terms of its influence in the world. And soft power is part of that. I mean, India gave us yoga. I mean, who on the planet doesn't know what yoga is, and who hasn't benefited? Maybe there are a few tribes somewhere in some isolated part of the world that hasn't, but most people have not only heard about yoga, but have done it and have at least understood an iota of what it's all about. Similarly, a more integrated way of living, of producing, of consuming, of measuring human progress. I think it would be brilliant if that could come from India, and why not?
Definitely. And also we'll have this massive challenge now, because as the economies revive, sustainable living, as Randeep puts it, as you put it, is going to become the biggest challenge. And I know that UN already has a massive challenge to make sure exactly what Randeep was saying, like how people can't just point fingers at the government, but the government needs to work with the citizens. But saying that, I know we're short on time. So I'm going to ask the last question to everyone, specifically on the panel, because what I realized that three of you are making very similar points, and there's an elephant in the room, right? And it's a massive, massive elephant, which makes us realize how humanity has failed biodiversity ecosystems.
You should have got a miner on the show.
Yeah.
Coal miner on the show. Then it would have been interesting.
Exactly. So we're working with a few miners.
That's what I mean. Don't try and convert the converted, bro. We should have a larger forum.
I would definitely share a lot of stories from ground with you as to how miners are working and how connecting the two worlds has been creating a lot of impact. There's definitely hope there, Randeep, for sure. But saying that, I know that you're short on time, and I know there's an elephant incident that has actually happened in the country. And I know you have to jump on another interview to actually talk about that as well. Is there something you want to talk about, how something that you mentioned about collective action could save incidents like this, could save humanity from feeling ashamed at incidents like this that actually happen, and how collective action can lead to that.
See, it has garnered a lot of attention, and I'm very glad that all aspects, all parts of society, government, non-governmental, or across the section of socio-economic and religious ideologies in the country, everybody has come in support for this heinous act that happened. Now, this is not the first time this has happened. This is something which is rampant, and it's not only rampant in that area, it is rampant in many areas. I heard a minister talk about that particular area, but the area of that minister had a tiger being beaten to death with sticks not very long ago. So we should not communalize it or politicize it. This is an ongoing problem. We have to, first of all, strengthen our punishment towards the culprits so that it acts as an example and a deterrent, and carry through. The convictions for crime against wildlife in this country is almost zilch. It's zilch. Even for poaching a tiger is 7 years in jail. So those things have to be severe, the severity has to be increased, and the implementation of that law has to be done with a heavy hand. Keeping that in mind, we have to, as I was saying earlier, it can only happen through education, sensitization, and giving these people a sense of pride that, hey, you are living in a place which has elephants, which has this, which has that. This pineapple probably was put out for a wild boar who must be eating some farmer's crop. Now, the forest department does compensate you for that crop, but people can and often do take things in their own hands. Now, the stricter measures are about all these things. So that particular guy who put in the pineapple, and all the people who are putting various other snares and other things to trap these animals, and even electric fences, so the elite are also involved in it. They have to have an example made so that it becomes and publicized and talked about as much as this crime has been talked about. But this is not the first time it's happened. And sadly, it seems it won't be the last time unless we educate the people.
And there's a lot of work to be, especially it's happening around Environment Day. Prerna, anything you would like to add? It's just a moment,
Randeep,
but I know you've been working on it for decades.
Yeah, so Randeep has more or less said what needs to be said on this particular elephant issue, which shook us all up. Going beyond that, I would just say effective implementation of the law, higher convictions, empowering the forest department. But please, the issue, I mean, I'm moving away from this, but raise your voice when elephant habitat is being given away. This is happening because elephants are losing their habitat, because wildlife is losing its habitat, because there's close proximity between people and wildlife. Highlight the tolerance of the people who live next to wildlife. This is a one-off incident. They face such things every day. There is no other country in the, India has so many carnivores and mega herbivores like elephants, gore, etc., living amidst one of the highest populations in the world. So that's something to celebrate. So, we live with wildlife, but at the same time, I would empower yourself with knowledge and then speak up for wildlife is what I would say. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you so much. As a closing remark, Renata, anything you would like to say? I know that collective action is the only thing that can work, where it's like not one side. Everybody needs to work together. And there's a long, long way to go. It's definitely a long, long way to go till we can actually make this point. Anything you would like to close the panel on?
I mean, I think it's easy to be pessimistic when you look around you, what's happening to the environment and how we're mistreating it. Badly mistreating it. So I would like to end on a more constructive, positive tone, because that's what the UN is all about.
Please, we need positivity.
Yes, we need hope.
First of all, I would like to say, just talking to this conversation is uplifting, and I hope that it's uplifted me, and I hope it will uplift many, many of the viewers. But secondly, I wanted to say that I don't know another country in the world that has endowed the legal status of a human being on rivers. The Ganga River and the Yamuna River were actually bestowed with legal status of a human being, which means that a crime against the river is a crime against humanity, in a sense, you could say. So I feel that embedded in this Indian subcontinent is all the answers to the struggles and the problems that we're dealing with. All the answers are there. And I'm confident that with that wisdom, will come to the fore through collective action, through research, through conversations, through negotiations, through many difficult encounters, etc., etc., etc. But I have confidence that the India can show the world how human beings and plants and animals, flora and fauna, can live together in harmony.
We will, Renata, we will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yes, thank you so much for being on this panel.
Thank you so much.
Happy
Thank you
World
so much.
Environment Day. And let's hope it's hopeful and we get a lot more people who take action and are more aware. Thank you so much, Renata. Thank you so much, Prerna, Randeep.
Thank you.
Let's
Thank
do
you.
this.
Bye. Bye.